Stop the music. Forget the rumors. Forget the courtroom spin. Forget every glossy headline trying to sell a redemption arc that never existed, because the ugliest update in the Diddy saga is not the alleged jail fight by itself. The ugliest update is what the fight allegedly proves. Diddy did not just end up in another violent mess behind bars. Diddy allegedly turned a prison scuffle into a public message, and that message sounds chillingly familiar. Diddy still wants the world to believe Diddy can dominate any room, any rival, any witness, any story, any consequence. That is the part that should make every alarm start ringing. Because look at the timing. Look at the pattern. Look at the leaks. Look at the language. Look at the image management. The minute talk started spreading that Diddy allegedly got into a fight at Fort Dix and landed in solitary confinement, another detail floated right behind the chaos. Diddy held Diddy's own. Diddy won. Diddy was disrespected. Then Diddy handled business. Now pause right there. Since when is that the detail anybody should be proud of? Since when is that the damage control headline? Since when does "won the fight" sound like legal strategy for a man whose future depends on proving discipline, transformation, and self-control? That is why this story matters more than people think. Because this is not just about whether fists flew. This is about whether Diddy's camp still believes raw intimidation is a viable brand. This is about whether every setback gets converted into the same old myth. Diddy as untouchable alpha, Diddy as feared operator, Diddy as aging king who can still make an example out of anybody. And if that is the myth being pushed while Diddy sits inside a federal facility, then Diddy may have accidentally answered the biggest question hanging over every victim statement, every defense talking point, and every public plea for sympathy. Changed where? Changed when? Changed how? Because nothing about this alleged update sounds like change. Everything about this alleged update sounds like an old script being performed in a smaller cage. And that is where this gets darker. The surface-level version says an inmate said something reckless. Diddy allegedly got heated, prison staff broke things up, and solitary followed. That version already sounds disastrous for Diddy. Good behavior credits do not grow on trees. Early release optimism does not survive fresh disciplinary problems. Judges do not hear violent incident in custody, and suddenly start dreaming about second chances. But the deeper version is worse. The deeper version says Diddy may still be chasing the emotional payoff that power used to bring. Somebody talks crazy, Diddy reacts. Somebody bruises Diddy's ego, Diddy escalates. Somebody challenges the image, Diddy moves to crush the challenge. That is not a prison problem. That is a personality pattern. And patterns are what matter. Anybody can sell remorse when cameras are on. Anybody can whisper healing language when freedom is on the line. Anybody can let lawyers wrap chaos in polished phrases about growth, accountability, reflection, and spiritual work. The test is pressure. The test is boredom. The test is humiliation. The test is losing access to luxury, control, and yes men. The test is whether the same old monster shows up the second pride gets poked. According to this explosive report, pride may have gotten poked and Diddy may have responded exactly like critics feared Diddy would. That is why the alleged fight hits harder than 1,000 apology statements. Because apology statements are theory. Pressure is proof. And if Diddy could not protect Diddy's own release timeline over a random prison insult, then what exactly was all that talk about rehabilitation worth? What exactly was the public supposed to do with those whispers that Diddy had calmed down, gotten reflective, gotten wiser, gotten softer, gotten humbled by the process? Humbled people do not allegedly turn trash talk into solitary confinement. Humbled people do not allegedly hand prison officials a clean new reason to question stability. Humbled people do not allegedly light a match next to the only bridge standing between a sentence and a shorter sentence. Yet that is where the story gets even more revealing. Because the leak itself feels like a tell. Think about it. If a man is accused of misconduct in prison, most crisis teams try to minimize humiliation, soften optics, and bury details. But here came the side detail that Diddy supposedly held Diddy's own. Why emphasize that? Why make sure that detail reached the public bloodstream? Why make sure the audience pictured Diddy not as reckless, but as dangerous? That is not the kind of framing that appears by accident. That is image curation. That is reputation management with a hard edge. That is not, please think better of Diddy. That is, please remember what Diddy can still do. And honestly, that is the part one cannot shake. Because once that detail lands, The whole update starts looking less like embarrassment and more like messaging. Not smart messaging. Not successful messaging. But messaging. The kind that says Diddy may be locked up, but Diddy is still Diddy. The kind that says age has not erased menace. The kind that says the street mythology should survive the bars. The kind that says public disgrace has not changed the internal operating system one bit. Now add that to every prior public debate about violence, control, and temperament, and suddenly this is not just another gossip cycle. This is a character witness from inside the walls. A terrible one. And before anybody says, well, jail is violent, everybody fights, things happen, stop right there. Of course prison is tense. Of course tempers flare. Of course human beings in confined systems crack. But most people inside do not have Diddy's exact incentives. Diddy reportedly had every reason to move like a monk. Diddy reportedly had every reason to swallow every insult, walk away from every provocation, and keep every correctional officer bored. Diddy reportedly had every reason to become the most disciplined version of Diddy's entire life. Not because enlightenment suddenly arrived, but because self-interest should have arrived. That is what makes this alleged blow-up so stunning. It suggests self-interest lost to ego. Again. And when self-interest loses to ego in a moment this important, people should not rush to excuse the moment. People should study the machinery behind the moment. Because the machinery is the story. The machinery says impulse may still outrank strategy. The machinery says image wounds may still provoke action faster than logic can restrain action. The machinery says consequences may still feel abstract to a man who spent decades watching money, status, and influence cushion every impact. That cushioning is gone now. Or at least it is supposed to be. Which brings up another uncomfortable point. Maybe Diddy's world has been built for so long around deference that basic resistance now registers as an emergency. Think about celebrity psychology for a second. Decades of power do strange things to ordinary conflict. A normal person hears an insult and weighs risk. A pampered empire builder hears an insult and may experience a threat to identity. Not just annoyance. Identity. If identity has been fused with dominance long enough, then disrespect can feel existential. That kind of wiring does not vanish because a judge says sit down. That kind of wiring gets exposed the minute nobody cares about the old rank. Prison does not care about old rank. That may be exactly why this alleged incident happened. Because prison is one of the few places where mythology gets stripped to bone. No velvet rope. No entourage buffer. No private compound. No luxury performance of invincibility. Just routine, restriction, proximity, and hierarchy with very different rules. In that setting, the old celebrity reflex can become self-sabotage. The instinct to dominate can become a trap. The need to answer disrespect can become a confession. And if Diddy allegedly fell into that trap, then Diddy did not just lose a fight or lose privileges. Diddy may have lost the argument that Diddy learned anything at all. That matters for victims. That matters for the public. That matters for anybody who ever wondered whether remorse was real or merely necessary. Because real change usually leaves fingerprints. Different choices. Lower heat. Delayed reaction. Less vanity. Less obsession with proving something. Less desperation to control the frame. But every detail in this latest mess points the other direction. The reported violence points one direction. The solitary confinement points one direction. The boast-flavored leak points one direction. Even the broader symbolism points one direction. Diddy may still be trying to win moments that are not worth winning, while losing the only war that matters. Freedom. And yes, that release date conversation suddenly deserves fresh attention. Reports have circulated that Diddy's projected release timing depends on good behavior credits. If that is true, then every disciplinary issue becomes expensive. Not metaphorically. Literally. Days matter. Credits matter. Official write-ups matter. Reputation inside matters. Institutional trust matters. So when a man with that much on the line allegedly swings anyway, the behavior tells a story that no publicist can clean up. The behavior says the emotional reward of asserting dominance may still overpower long-term planning. That is a dangerous sentence. Not just legally. Psychologically. Because a person who keeps choosing short-term ego relief over long-term survival is telling the world where the real loyalty lives. Not with family. Not with future. Not with healing. Not with accountability. With ego. With image. With the immediate narcotic of feeling strong in a moment of disrespect. That kind of loyalty can wreck careers, homes, cases, and lives. That kind of loyalty can make a grown man torch years for seconds. That kind of loyalty can turn confinement into theater. And theater is another huge part of this. What if the alleged fight was not only emotional, but performative? Not fake. Not staged. Performative in the deeper sense. A moment where Diddy felt compelled to show something. To prove something. To remind a room that age, charges, and bars do not erase threat value. If that instinct still exists, then Diddy may still be living inside an ancient script where fear equals respect, reaction equals strength, and retaliation equals order. That script destroys people. That script also ages badly, because eventually the world stops applauding intimidation and starts documenting it. Which is exactly where Diddy sits now. Documented. Discussed. Dissected. And still, somehow, allegedly acting like the old rules should work. Another thing nobody is talking about enough is how terrible the solitary detail looks on a human level. Solitary for an alleged fight is not just a disciplinary inconvenience. Solitary is its own psychological signal. It means prison authorities did not treat this like harmless roughhousing between bored men passing time. Solitary says officials believed separation was necessary. Solitary says order had to be restored. Solitary says the incident crossed into territory the institution could not ignore. Even if later details shift, that initial placement alone sends a loud message. Not maturity. Not control. Not peace. Chaos. And chaos is the exact thing Diddy can least afford to symbolize right now. Which is why the people trying to spin this as some twisted badge of honor are misreading the entire board. Nobody serious hears, Diddy won a jail fight, and thinks leadership. Nobody serious hears, Diddy got sent to solitary, and thinks resilience. Nobody serious hears, Diddy handled disrespect, and thinks growth. Normal adults hear danger. Normal adults hear volatility. Normal adults hear same impulses, worse setting. That is the real translation. And if Diddy's inner circle is still choosing optics that celebrate volatility, then Diddy's inner circle may be addicted to the same sickness. Protect the legend at all costs, even when the legend itself is the problem. That sickness has a body count. It always does. Because legend building around volatile men always asks everybody else to ignore the shattered glass on the floor. Ignore the fear. Ignore the coercion. Ignore the manipulation. Ignore the stories. Ignore the trail. Focus on charisma. Focus on power. Focus on talent. Focus on the room getting quiet when the king walks in. But the bill always arrives. The bill shows up in testimony, in footage, in silence, in damaged people, in children inheriting confusion, in partners inheriting pain, in associates inheriting moral rot, and in the man at the center inheriting consequences that no amount of myth can outrun forever. Maybe that is why this alleged fight update feels so, not because it is surprising, because it is consistent. Consistency is what makes ugly stories credible. One isolated mistake invites debate. One old accusation invites spin. One weird rumor invites caution. But a recurring emotional signature? That is harder to ignore. The recurring signature here is simple. Insult, reaction, escalation, fallout, reframing. Over and over. Somebody pushes a button. Diddy allegedly lunges for control. Then someone nearby tries to narrate the aftermath as proof of toughness instead of proof of dysfunction. That cycle is practically a factory line. So yes, people should care about whether the report is confirmed in full. People should care about what prison officials actually documented. People should care about whether the details were exaggerated, minimized, or strategically leaked. But even before every administrative box gets checked, the shape of the story already says plenty. The shape says Diddy's greatest enemy may still be Diddy's relationship with humiliation. The shape says losing status may not have produced reflection. Losing status may have produced desperation. And desperation in a man who confuses force with identity is combustible. That should scare everybody cheering for a triumphant comeback narrative. Because comeback narratives require an actual turn. Where is the turn? Where is the stillness? Where is the discipline? Where is the evidence that Diddy can sit with wounded pride without reaching for destruction? Nothing about this alleged update answers those questions in Diddy's favor. If anything, this alleged update turns every past defense into smoke. Diddy was under stress. Plenty of people are under stress. Diddy is older now. Age without insight just produces an older problem. Diddy has had time to think. Thinking is not transformation. Diddy knows what is at stake. Clearly knowing is not the same thing as governing action. The strongest evidence of change is not speech. The strongest evidence of change is boring behavior repeated under pressure. That is the gold standard. Quiet restraint. Predictable calm. Refusal to bite the hook. According to this report, Diddy bit the hook. Hard. And the hook may cost more than a few lost comforts. Because every new story teaches the public how to interpret the old ones. That is why this matters beyond one prison hallway. A fresh allegation of impulsive violence makes past allegations easier to believe, not harder. A fresh inability to regulate anger makes old assurances about growth ring hollow, not noble. A fresh choice to risk everything over pride makes every plea for trust sound like a sales pitch, not a truth. That is the hidden cost of alleged self-destruction in real time. The future is not the only thing that gets damaged. The past gets relit. Every shadow gets sharper. Every excuse gets weaker. Every victim who said, "That pattern never stopped," suddenly sounds less like a critic and more like a witness. And maybe that is the real reason this story is spreading so fast. Not because the public loves scandal. The public loves pattern recognition. The public can smell repetition. The public knows when a man is not battling circumstances as much as a man is replaying identity. Diddy may not just be trapped in a facility. Diddy may be trapped in Diddy's own oldest operating system, hitting the same destructive command every time disrespect enters the room. That kind of prison is harder to leave. Bars eventually open. Patterns do not, unless somebody kills the appetite for domination at the root. And right now, there is no visible proof that appetite is gone. Only more smoke. More consequences. More whispers. More signals that the same engine may still be running under a cracked hood. So no, the biggest takeaway is not, Diddy won a fight. That takeaway is juvenile. That takeaway is propaganda for people who confuse fear with greatness. The biggest takeaway is that Diddy may have treated a prison insult like a referendum on identity, and allegedly responded in the one language that keeps wrecking Diddy's life. That is not strength. That is captivity. That is a man so dependent on domination that even confinement cannot interrupt the ritual. And if that is true, then early freedom is not the scariest question anymore. The scariest question is what happens if the world keeps mistaking volatility for power. Because every time a violent story gets repackaged as proof of toughness, somebody somewhere learns the wrong lesson. Somebody learns that intimidation preserves manhood. Somebody learns that consequences are secondary to image. Somebody learns that making people fear a reaction is better than earning people's respect. That lie destroys ordinary homes long before that lie reaches celebrity compounds or prison walls. So this moment should not be treated like entertainment alone. This moment should be treated like an X-ray. An ugly, high-contrast X-ray of what happens when ego becomes religion and control becomes oxygen. Diddy may have more lawyers, more headlines, more defenders, and more mythology than the average man, but the anatomy still looks familiar. Pride gets nicked. Rage arrives. Future burns. Story gets repackaged. Cycle repeats. If prison could not interrupt that cycle, then sympathy campaigns definitely cannot. At some point, the noise has to stop and the pattern has to speak for itself. Right now, the pattern is screaming. And the scream sounds like this. Diddy may be locked up, but the most dangerous part of Diddy may still be walking free inside Diddy's own mind. That is why the alleged fight matters. Not because it is flashy. Because it is clarifying. Not because it makes Diddy look hard. Because it makes the excuses look soft. Not because it proves a comeback is impossible. Because it proves a comeback cannot be built on mythology, spin, and public amnesia. A comeback would require a funeral for the old self, not another performance by the old self in a new location. And until that funeral happens, every fresh incident will keep translating the same way. Same hunger. Same ego. Same reflex. Same wreckage. Just smaller rooms. Watch what this alleged incident values above everything else. Not peace. Not patience. Not tomorrow. not the possibility of earning trust from people who already doubt every polished statement. The alleged incident values the instant hit of making sure no disrespect goes unanswered. That value system is expensive in public, expensive in private, and catastrophic in confinement. A disciplined man banks time. A reactive man spends future like loose cash. If Diddy allegedly chose a burst of pride over a shorter road home, then Diddy did not just tell on Diddy's temper. Diddy told on Diddy's priorities. And priorities under pressure are where the truth usually lives. Case closed.